All right. Well, I haven't really prepared remarks per se. Dad and Mom loved the idea of what you call the Quaker. Well, I guess it was the Quaker form of funeral, which was a Quaker meeting wherein everyone got together and talked about their best memories of the people they loved, and that was their ideal for a celebration after they were gone. And so that's what I'm attempting to do, right down to not really being that prepared with what I'm going to say. But we're going to try to have everyone give a memory and capture it with the help of Dee and Taz, and that way we can even make a video to send to everybody. And meanwhile, we're also streaming so that the folks who couldn't be here today can watch in real time and also get the video version. So with that said, the first thing I think I'll do is play the memories of a friend who couldn't be here, Reuben Ortenberg, who was a really good friend of my dad's. They met in 1965 when Dad was first going to work for the Civil Rights Division of Justice Department. And he and his wife became my parents' first best friends. Well, probably not their very first, because I think they had some in Birmingham and Chicago who were close. But these were the folks that I most remember, because they kind of came into life when I was old enough to remember. And he's very, very fond of Dad, and they were fellow baseball lovers, although he was a Yankees fan. My father somehow forgave him for that. And because Dad was an Orioles fan from the time the Orioles were the St. Louis Browns, and that goes back a few years. So at any rate, Reuben's going to tell you a little bit about working with Dad, and then read a couple of Dad's baseball poems. Now, we sort of played Reuben first to give a little inspiration, and I'm hoping that the rest of you might have similar memories. And I know that John Hedberg, who is my dad's cousin, is going to read us a portion of one of his short stories. I never know. So you'll hear a little more of Dad's writing, and also Mom's voice at one point. But I sort of wanted to get started with us folks who are here, so that Mr. D could, Reverend D actually, could record those while he's here, and then it's possibly after we've heard from everybody who would like to speak that we'll play some more recordings. I think that would be the way we might want to do it, except John, who is going to read a poem and a short story. So, what about you, Aunt Sue? Do you want to speak?
I just wanted to tell about when we went up to visit them one time, and I'm talking about we. It was Carrie and Lawson. Lawson is my oldest my first grand. And we went up there, and Lawson was 18 months old? Yeah, maybe 18 months old. Lawson went everywhere with us. He went up there, and Mary Ann made the biggest to-do over this child, showing her all her frogs. They played with frogs the entire time we were there. They went out in the yard and found frogs to play with, live ones. But we had the most awesome time with there, and it was just a wonderful time, that visit we had. It was like the first time Lawson had ever been on a trip like that, but it was awesome. And they were always so gracious to us the two times we went up there to see them. And I just wanted to share that little ditty about Lawson and the frogs.
My mom was a frog collector.
Oh, yes.
Everyone gave her frogs.
And she loved it.
I grew up in Style, Alabama. And every summer, for as long as I could remember, for why I don't remember, Mary Ann would come and stay with us for quite a while in Style. I thought she was the most beautiful, beautiful person in the world with that blonde hair and those blue eyes. And as a matter of fact, she was the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful people in the world. I loved her. Everybody thoroughly enjoyed her visit. Kay, our uncle, was fairly careful to keep some of his cohorts away from Mary Ann because she attracted a lot of male attention when she was there. And I always knew that Mary Ann would have to marry Prince Charming. There was no other way around it. It would have to happen. And it did. I mean, Jerry Norris was a prince. There's no doubt about it. He was one of my heroes when he chose to work with the Justice Department. Now, our family was relatively inclined to tithe to George Wallace, so that wasn't a real politically smart thing for Jerry to do as far as fitting in the family, but it did not deter him one iota. He did his job. He did it beautifully. I loved him. I loved what he did, and my family grew to love him too. For the way that he treated Mary Ann, for the way that he treated our Aunt Mag. He was a true, true prince. And I also have similar memories of traveling there to visit and being treated with just the most wonderful hospitality that you could ever ask for. We were toured around. We were shown things we wouldn't have gotten to see in just an ordinary trip. It was so very, very special. My husband loved visiting them, and our daughter remembers the trip to this day. But I'm so appreciate you're doing this, you and Tim. It's just a wonderful idea, and I can see them loving every bit of it. Thank you for doing this.
Okay, and Linda, could you identify your relationship to Mom and Dad, because maybe... Okay, my mother is Clea, was Mary Ann's mother's sister. That Aunt Mag is Mary Ann's mother, and that was my aunt. So I'm a cousin. And we got to spend many, many, many summers with Mary Ann, and I used to get her hand-me-downs. That was always lots of fun to get those hand-me-downs when she'd bring those with her too. And Sue is the wife of...
Yeah, I was married to Mary Ann's brother. One of them.
They usually call him Preacher.
Preacher,
We know
yeah.
him as Danny. So
Yeah.
both of those names you'll hear.
I'm Steve Price. I'm Mary Ann's youngest and best-looking son, brother. That's my brother Truman back there. And Linda, we used to, in the summertime, Mom would ship us off down to Clea's house, and we'd spend time down in the country, and I learned to drive from Linda's sister, Leona, back when I was probably about 13 years old. She would take us out and tool around, but we just have a tremendous family. I'm just proud of all of them. And, you know, my father died when I was 12 years old at 53, and all my family kind of rallied around me to bring me up through those difficult years from 12 to manhood. Truman and Jean were instrumental in that. Danny and Sue all helped along, and Mary Ann and Jerry were you know, they were just like the best. They you know, I think they were like more like mentors to me, because like Linda said, we didn't grow up real rich, right? We came from humble beginnings, and Mary Ann and Jerry kind of opened the door to a more sophisticated life. You know, I saw what a college education could do. I saw what could be accomplished through Jerry's studies and Mary Ann supporting each other. But I think that's the thing that got me the most, was the way that they supported each other. I saw in Jerry, I saw a man who treated his wife with respect, treated her as an equal, would bring her coffee in bed every morning. He'd wake up early and bring her coffee in bed. So it kind of taught me that way of thinking. And, I would visit them for long periods of time when Chris and Tim were growing up, and we all grew up kind of like brothers and sisters as well. And, they would take me places and show me things and share things with me. When they lived in DC, they took us to see all the monuments and, all there was to see in DC. And when I got back to school, I had seen things that none of my classmates had seen because of Marion and Jerry's, generosity in showing us around. Jerry took me to see the Washington Senators play when the Senators were in Washington. I remember seeing Frank Howard play. He also took me to see the Orioles and Boog Powell. That was the first Major League Baseball game I'd ever been to. But, Mary Ann was 16 years older than me. So I never knew a Mary Ann without a Jerry. So they told me that when Jerry was courting Mary Ann, that I threw a pool ball at him, like a pool ball, and hit him in the head. And so that was our introduction. And also I was told that, when they got married, I kind of dug in the wedding cake before they were ready to serve it. But, in Mary Ann's way, she always just laughed that off. But she was also a fierce protector of all her siblings. I remember Danny, my middle brother, was a shopkeeper had accused him of stealing some candy or something. So they called the house, and Mary Ann happened to be there that summer, and she took the phone call, and she listened to the guy, and she went down there, and she basically, after listening to the facts, he had no proof, and she tore him a new one. Let's put that one. Let's put it. So when push came to shove, she was like a mama bear, right? She would defend her family, but she was always kind, even-tempered, loved her kids, and as somebody else was saying, she was always gentle with them, and kind of had that way of leading them along without a lot of raising her voice, but she was so sweet. And when my mom had a stroke and became incapacitated, Mary Ann and Jerry took her in to North Carolina with them from Birmingham, and she basically stayed with them. They took care of her, and it's amazing that that they had just retired. They could be traveling around the country and enjoying their retirement, but they made this decision to take care of my mom, and that always meant a lot to me. They also had a great taste in music, and I'm sure that their friends remembered this. They had this big record collection down at the bottom of their entertainment center, and it had things in there like Freewheelin' by Bob Dylan, and Pete Seeger, Peter, Paul and Mary, and Glenn Campbell. And one song that Jerry always loved, and I heard you playing it here, was Anne by Glenn Campbell. I don't know if you ever get a chance to look that up on YouTube. It's a great song. It's something about, I went to and told her mother, "Thank you, ma'am, for giving me your daughter Anne," I think was one of the lyrics in there. So that shaped my thinking about music, and later I went into the radio business, and that was part of, I think, what helped me get there was that. But just overall, Mary Ann and Jerry just meant so much to me. Mary Ann was like a second mom to me. She would, I could call her at any time, and she would check in with me often, and we could tell each other our problems and what was going on, and share a tear, share a laugh. But and Jerry was just fantastic. I mean, he was the best brother-in-law somebody could ask for. So we miss them greatly. And as somebody said before, I think the world is a better place for having them in it. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that my dad absolutely adored his mother-in-law. You know, he just thought the world and all of Mag because, well, she was a very altruistic person, a very gentle person, and I guess, was his big fan, you know, because he was so good to my mom. And so when she was ill and lived with them, he really was the primary caretaker during that time. I just think they really enjoyed, and I know I did, when I would go visit, I'd be able to see all of them, my grandmother and my mom and dad together, and she loved the pond on which they lived and watching the birds and squirrels out there, and they got her a cat. My parents really weren't pet people, but my grandmother loved cats and dogs, and she got a little long-haired calico cat named Lovey. You might even see some pictures of her on there because she just meant so much to my grandmother. And but when I called her my Gubber Mag because she was 38 years old when I was born and did not want to be called Granny. So she said, I want to be called grandmother. And I tried, but it came out Gubber. And ultimately I called both her and my other grandma, Sally, Gubber Mag and Gubber Sally. So, but she loved that cat, and when she passed away, my parents brought that kitty to us so fast. We already had a cat, but they felt that that was the best home for Lovey with us. So, and Lovey just loved Rob, so that worked out quite well. So I just wanted to add that. Did you want to perhaps say?
Right. So my name is Kirsten Leonard, and I am from a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I am Jerry's cousin, possibly his youngest cousin, as I've been thinking about it today. And so my mom, Jane, was his Sally's, his mom's youngest sister. And I think they were about 12 or 13 years apart in age. So my first memory of Jerry and Marianne and Chris and Tim was when I was 14 years old. I flew to DC with my 8th grade class just after school had ended, and we went there, of course, for a historic visit to see some sights. And so my mom and dad arranged ahead of time. That's when the family lived in Virginia. So they arranged ahead of time with Jerry and Marianne to, hey, could you come and meet Kirsten while she's there with her class? So they did, and I think they came to a restaurant that was close to the motel that I was staying at with my class. And as I reconnected with Tim last night, he said it was an IHOP. So I came over from the motel by myself and walked in, having, if I had met Jerry before that, I was a little girl and didn't remember. So I walked in and the family was sitting there, and they got right up and just welcomed me to the table, and I just, remember it as a very easy thing to do, and just getting to know the family. So that is a dear memory to me. But what I want to share here is a letter that Jerry wrote to us, but to my parents. at the summer of their 50th wedding anniversary, and that was back in August of 2000. And we had reached out to family members and asking them, if you want to share a memory, please send us a letter. So this is that letter that Jerry sent in July of 2000. Dear Kirsten, as you've no doubt heard by now from your folks, Anne and I will not be able to be present for the August 18th celebration of Jane and Perry's 50th wedding anniversary. We think it's great that the four of you are honoring them in this special way, and we're hoping the day is a huge success. As for the memory box, I am among the few people who have more memories of your mother from before the wedding than after. My wife Anne and I had only the briefest association with Jane and Perry during their Chicago days, which ended just before our own Chicago days began. But I have memories of your mom's visit to Las Vegas, New Mexico, when I lived there as a small boy with my mother, Jane's older sister Sally. It was, I think, 1944 when Jane came all the way out there. I think she had just graduated from college at the time, or perhaps she was still a college student. I remember being amazed and impressed at her extensive knowledge of the New Testament. She had with her a large box of flashcards with hundreds of biblical verses on them and the verse citations on the back. I would marvel at her ability accurately to recite verse after verse as I held up the cards at random. I managed to find a couple of photographs from the Las Vegas visit, and since it's possible your mother doesn't have copies, perhaps you and your siblings have never seen them. Both photos seem to have been developed locally in Las Vegas, so they're both from that same brief visit. And then he just goes on to describe those two pictures. The one with the two soldiers features Earl Toner, who in early 1946 would become my stepfather, and who died in 1982. The man on the right was an army friend of Earl's, known to me only by his nickname Drizzle. It was taken in the front yard of our Las Vegas house. Anne and I visited Las Vegas in October 1998 and found the house, already old in 1944, still standing and occupied. I don't know if I just turned that off. Your mom was a lovely young woman in those long ago days, and I remember as a 7-year-old being extraordinarily impressed with my Aunt Jane, the only person in my family who'd ever gone to college. I wish I had more memories of Jane and Perry in their married days. I do recall accompanying them during a visit to Chicago to a Billy Graham rally sometime in the late 50s. But sadly, the time I spent with them was brief. Again, our best wishes for a memorable celebration. Jerry. So, and I don't have the picture right here, but I do have a lovely picture that Wendy, my sister here, had in her collection of Jerry as a little boy in a uniform. So if we connect after the memories are shared, I have it on my phone, so I'd be glad to share that with any of you. It's just a real privilege to be here and be part of this.
These were close friends of Mom and Dad when we lived in Decatur and Atlanta, Georgia.
Hi. Hello, I'm Francine, and Harris and I first met Marianne and Jerry when Harrison was in law school. I'm not exactly, I guess through Dan, we connected, and we became really good friends. We used to go over to their house and we would watch TV and talk, and just was sort of a standard Friday or Saturday night thing with us. And the only other memory I have other than that was Mary Ann and I started playing tennis together. Because I used to play tennis when Harrison was in law school and I could get a court. But once he graduated, I couldn't get a tennis court anymore. And Mary Ann says, well, you know, there's a tennis court right down the street from me. They lived on a street called Willoughby. And you just crossed the main road and there was this little tennis court. So she and I started playing tennis. I have a lot of good memories of us doing that together. We would meet on a weekly basis. And we just enjoyed laughs and fun, and we both were enjoying tennis, so it was a fun time. And of course, we knew the kids, Tim and Chris, and they were little guys. I mean, he was probably about 4 or 5, and she might have been 7 or 8. So seeing them as adults is kind of sobering in a way. Brings the point home, you know, none of us is getting any younger. But anyway, it's been a privilege to see them and to meet some of the people who knew Mary Ann and Jerry. So thank you very much for organizing this and bringing us all here. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that my parents' friends, especially in those days, were extremely patient because Tim and I were always there. I mean, we hung out with these poor folks trying to have a grown-ups party, you know. But I don't know why. It was so cool. It was fun to be with our parents, folks. And I also have this regrettable memory of forcing Fran and Harrison to watch us do a show, and the show just kind of went on and on and on and on. But they were very patient. So, did you?
Yeah, I would be. I don't know. Can all of y'all hear me? We need a microphone.
Oh, for the production.
Two things, and again, I would reiterate that Mary Ann and Jerry were very gracious, opened their home to us many times. I do remember Jerry taking great delight when they were the Redskins back in those days, when Washington beat Dallas on Monday Night Football. I was a Dallas Cowboy fan, and Jerry tried to conceal some of his glee at the Washington's victory and Dallas' defeat. Jerry offered me my first legal job after my first year of law school. I was working for a construction company, building apartment houses, and Jerry got me a summer internship with housing and urban development. I've practiced law a long time, and I know Jerry had a very accomplished career, but one of the things I mentioned to Chris is I'm not sure Jerry realized how capable and bright he was. I wouldn't say this about many lawyers because there are a lot of egos involved, but I think Jerry was probably more modest than he should have been. And like I said, it was a real pleasure and a privilege to get to know him and Mary Ann.
All right. I'm Simon. I am preacher Danny's second son, his youngest son. I chose in my life to go serve in the military, and my daddy was a Vietnam vet. When talking to my father, we would talk about why he thought so much, why he went to the service, and we would get on stories, and he would talk about Aunt Mary Ann meeting Uncle Jerry, and Uncle Jerry giving his old Army uniforms to my daddy, and my daddy using those to play dress up, and thinking he was a little soldier. And then even in the middle of the war, during Vietnam, when the option was go to war or finish high school, my daddy was said, I'll go to war, and it created a ripple effect that, I ended up serving myself. So, but when I was in the service and I went and was stationed in North Carolina, I was after embassy duty, I ended up being stationed in Havelock, right down the road from New Bern, where Aunt Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry lived. And I would routinely, Aunt Mary Ann would again, like Uncle Steve alluded to, she would message me through Facebook, hit me up and say, hey, how you been? You know, we ain't seen you in a while. Would you like to have dinner? And would always have me out, and they would take me out and they would just check on me, make sure I was doing well. And when my son was born, I got married and my son was born in North Carolina. And Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry, you know, she was on her oxygen. They got in the van, they drove all the way down to Morehead City where we lived, came up to the apartment on the 3rd story, walked all the way up all them stairs, and was up there going, that's a little cute baby right there. And she was right there for us.
Do you
And
think she wanted some grandchildren?
well, it always made a severe impression on me throughout my life. The protective and deep and understanding, loving relationship that Aunt Mary Ann always had for my daddy, how that went to my daddy's children, us, and how I benefited from it, and how great, just as everyone else has said, how gracious and loving Aunt Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry were. You know, Uncle Jerry I was a hardcore Marine. Uncle Jerry didn't believe in some of the same beliefs I had at the time with my service. But he would sit there and put up with me running my mouth, and then he would politely be like, well, have you considered da 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 da? And it would open my mind to a lot of things that at the time I was closed-minded to because of my profession. He always had a way of just saying it in a way that did not come off condescending. It did not come off that he knew more than you. It just came off as a genuine curiosity and a genuine compassion to share the intelligence he had with someone else so that they weren't walking through this world with blinders on. And I always appreciated Aunt Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry for their love and for their knowledge and for the way they shared it.
Hi, I'm John Hedberg, cousin to Jerry, and I've got a couple of different things to read, but on this time around, I'll start out with a poem that Jerry has written. Some of you may be aware that he loved trees, and so this is about a tree. Out by the road, they're tearing down a tree. A fine new house will occupy that lot. The two could coexist, it seems to me, but no surprise, my views were never sought. For 80 years that silent sentry stood and guarded open pastures all around. Before our house, before the neighborhood, before a narrow path was first trod down. That tree has got to go, the owner said. It's all dried up and bent. It's too damned old. And true enough, those barren limbs seem dead when all their leaves succumb to winter's cold. How beautifully, as evening darkness came, that oak would toll the day and greet the night. At dusk, each twisted branch would make a frame for sunset's bright display of flaming lights. So now, our newest neighbor's outsized plot is free of trees of any size or kind. Some grass, a high-board fence, a pool he's got. The oak is out of sight and out of mind. And where once stood that splendid ancient tree, now sits the cable box for his TV.
Hi, I'm Michelle Price Mann. So I am Truman's daughter, which would have been Mary Ann's brother and probably closest in age to him. But I came along a little later. I feel like I'm kind of like the next generation when Aunt Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry were already in D.C. or in Virginia, I guess. I think around the time I came along, maybe. Those are my memories, my first memories.
You just got into Georgia for that.
Really? Okay. So by the time my memories catch up with me, you guys were in Virginia because that was the first plane trip I ever took, was to Annandale or Alexandria. Is that where y'all were? Alexandria? Annandale. Okay, so that was my first plane trip as a 9-year-old girl with my cousin and Granny and Gubber Mags, or Granny as I called her. By the time I came along, I could call her Granny. She'd forgiven us by then. We could go ahead and call her Granny. So with Granny Price, and we took our first plane trip, and that was, I think that's part of what Aunt Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry did, is they opened up the world to us. I think we all kind of agree in a sense that they really opened up the world and showed me a way of living, and even just educationally and intellectually, they always encouraged that. When Uncle Jerry made a comment that made me feel smart, I was like, oh, you feel really, really smart, really intelligent. But when I went to, my cousin and I and Granny went to Annandale, and we visited, and Aunt Mary Ann is just always it's really interesting to hear more stories about her being gentle and kind, because that's all I remember is just her hospitality and how warm she was and how she just made you feel at home wherever you were. And on that trip, I think Tim you were probably in your teens, 14, 15, enough that your 9-year-old girl cousins tagging along was really embarrassing to him. So I do remember him telling me, you can come along with me, to the video store. That tells you about the time frame, but don't say anything. I don't want anyone to know where you're from, because he knew our little accents would give us away. But Aunt Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry were always just pouring into us just the love and kindness. And one of the most beautiful memories in my mind is when they lived in New Bern, and Jeff and I, my husband, and Uncle Jerry shared a love of baseball, so they connected immediately from the very beginning. But Jeff and I were newlyweds. We'd just been married, I think, probably 6 months, and we decided that we wanted to spend our first Thanksgiving away from home. Instead of having to decide whose house we were going to go to, we just decided to head up to New Bern and have a new adventure. And of course, Aunt Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry welcomed us in, and Chris and Tim were there, and Rob, and we just really had a really sweet time. But in their kindness, they rented us an Airbnb or a bed and breakfast. They rented us a room at a bed and breakfast close by, knowing that, newlyweds wanted to have their own space and their own time. And they were always just considerate, always so thoughtful, always thinking about other people and making them feel like the most important person in the room. And that is what they did for everyone around them. And I wish I knew now how accomplished he was. I didn't know that. I was just a little girl, and that was my uncle. And I thought he was wonderful, and he worked in D.C., and that was just amazing. And, but all I knew of him was that kind, respectful, honoring way that he had with everyone around him. And always so made me feel so valued and so precious whenever I spent time with him. And Aunt Mary Ann was the same way. And, but their gentleness, I think his humor and just outgoing, personality, and Aunt Mary Ann's gentleness and quietness complemented each other so beautifully in the time that I was with them. It was just beautiful to see. And it did set the stage, I think, for us and the next generation, just knowing, valuing that college education and knowing what academics. And I became a writer, I think in big part because Uncle Jerry was a writer. He worked for a newspaper, so I just thought, that seems like an awesome job. That seems like a great job. But I knew I didn't want to work for a newspaper, so I just worked for a magazine instead. But I think that desire to write and that desire to be creative and the desire to pour out on paper and the love of words came from Uncle Jerry, kind of came down through Chris and Tim and came down to us as well. And now I've have 4 kids of my own who love words and love creativity and love to write. And so I think that's just a sweet gift that he passed down to us. So Aunt Mary Ann and Uncle Jerry left an indelible impression on all of us, and that will carry down through the generations, which is going to be really precious. So thank you, Chris and Rob and Tim, for hosting this and bringing us all together. I've learned so much already, just from memories that you've shared already, but even today I've gotten to learn so much more, and that allows me a treasure to pass along to my children, which should be wonderful. They're already taking pictures up here of letters from Richard Nixon. They were they just showed me a letter and went, "Mom, did you see this?" I know. I'm learning, but yes, I know. But anyway, thank you so much.
My mom kept this little journal, but really the only entries in it are meeting my dad. She began writing January 10th, 1961, so that was 4 days before I was born. And I guess she was sort of reflecting on how fast this had all gone, because I was born 9 months and 27 days after they got married. So this account includes their wedding. I'm not going to read all this, I promise you. Their wedding, their honeymoon, and it was a great honeymoon, I got to tell you. And it also talks about when I was born. So it's a treasure to have, and I did not know that it existed until the day she died, because I went into a cabinet where I knew some of the information about what her burial wishes were and everything, and I was kind of thinking I'd better pull all that out. And I found this book, and she never mentioned it. I don't know if she put it there on purpose, so I might find it, but I keep this in a fireproof strongbox with my important papers because I would never want to lose it. It's so important. But I just wanted to briefly read about their meeting because, of course, that's, I'm really glad that happened personally. In May of 1959, Jerry was a cub reporter for the Birmingham Post-Herald, age 22, and I was a cashier for Frank B. Clark and Green Darden Realtors, age 18. We had been riding the same bus for some time. I had noticed him on the bus before, and he later admitted that he had noticed me, or at least he had noticed my legs. One evening in May, it had been raining and I had no umbrella. My hair was wet and limp. I was waiting for the bus. I looked up and he was walking toward me, all smiles. He said hi and we started talking. We sat together on the bus and talked until I had to get off. The next time we met on the bus, he asked me to go swimming with him. The next Saturday, I quickly accepted. When he started to take my telephone number, and then I found that, then he started to take my phone number, and then I found that he thought my last name was Bryce instead of Price. So the next Saturday it was raining, so we spent the day at his house instead. I met his parents and his sister, and I liked them immediately. After that, things progressed rapidly. He dated no one else from our first date on, and I only dated one other boy, but not for long. So I'll put this up with the other items if you want to take a look, but it's kind of rated R in one spot. I just want to let you know.
For the sake of expediency, I will read only a couple of pages of one of Jerry's writings. This writing pertains to when he assisted black citizens to register to vote in Selma in 1965. Jerry describes the two buildings that faced off against one another. On one side of the street, it was the Dallas County Courthouse. That was facing the federal courthouse on the other side of the street. The black citizens were registering at the federal courthouse. He was impressed by the long line of people wanting to register to vote. The line went down the street all the way around the block and continued so all day long. It was impressive also because it was an August day and it was very hot, but people were in line to accomplish a task and they got that done. So I'll pick up on page 3 and we'll finish with page 5. The Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965 had just been adopted. Dallas County was among a scattered few places in the southern United States where federal examiners had been sent in immediately. These were places where blatant past discrimination by local government made it clear that black citizens would never be permitted to register in significant numbers, not unless it was the federal voting examiners who did the registering. In that long, long line on that very first day stood a thin, bent man of obviously advanced age. He was in the company of a middle-aged woman and two younger women, all awaiting their first opportunity to exercise full rights of citizenship. The man stood out in the crowd. He was white-haired and tall, but stooped, and he was very old. One of the handful of young lawyers from the Justice Department working in Selma on that day had been near overwhelmed by the dramatic turnout. That person probably was Jerry. He doesn't refer to himself, but I imagine it was him. It surprised him because there was no great hurry, really. There was no election scheduled for that week or that month. The voting examiners were going to be in Selma for as long as it took to see that every citizen who wanted to register had been afforded the opportunity. The local people knew that, but it didn't matter. They wanted to reddish on that day, on that very first day that they could. Walking along the line, the young lawyer exchanged a few words with the old man and asked him how old he was. The woman answered for him. "He's 94, she said. He's my daddy." Their little group was just inside the main entrance when the young man first spotted them. They were facing at least another 4 hours in line before they would reach the examiners. "I don't think any of these people here would object," he told the woman, "if I were to take you and your father up closer to the front of the line. I'm pretty sure none of these folks would mind that at all." Before the woman could answer, the old man spoke up for himself. "That real kind of you, sir," he said. "But don't trouble yourself. I'm doing fine right here in the line with the other folk. Been waiting all my life for this day, and I reckon I can wait a little while longer." Hours later, the Justice Department attorneys made some estimates based on the progress being made by the examiners. They determined that some part of the still lengthy line would necessarily have to be cut off and sent away unsatisfied, so that the examiners could close their office and go back to the motel for dinner and rest. Everyone at the line's cutoff point was given a careful, polite explanation. The line was just too long. The examiners had worked hard all day. Tomorrow was, after all, another day, and all who returned on a subsequent day could be assured of their right to register. The 94-year-old man and his family were still in line at that point. They had reached the top floor and were within sight of the doorway that led to the examiner's office. The young lawyer made certain to cut off the line at a point well behind the spot where the old man stood waiting. The voting examiners had a tough job and would be weary after their long first day. They were going to be having a late dinner. But that old man was, by God, going to go home that night as a registered voter in the state of Alabama. Jerry Norris.
I know my Uncle Truman wanted to say one thing briefly.
I'll just take just a moment. I was just thinking that Mary Ann and Jerry are married 64 years, and I never heard an argument. They always loved each other, respected each other, and perfect marriage.
And I can bear that out. I never heard them raise their voices either. And they get a little snarky with each other sometimes. I think that we're good then. We do have an Army Guard, Army National Guard folks who are going to come in and do present my dad's flag. He was in the peacetime Army quite briefly. I'm not sure it was, I guess it must have been 2 years. I guess it was a 2-year thing. And
She's saying 2 years.
did that on purpose. Oh, she wanted me to do it.
On behalf of the President of the United States, please accept this flag as a symbol of appreciation and honor. Thank you so much.
Well, this concludes the formal on-film version of the memories. We have many more, and we will add them so that anyone who receives the video can enjoy them as well. And certainly we're all going to go on reminiscing, I'm sure. But thanks everyone who joined us, and thanks for caring so much about my mom and dad.